that, and then we can open it up to some Q&A. But of course, we're going into a very difficult economic period. A lot of unknowns. We don't know. We took a body blow with the recession in 2008 and came out better than other states. So we have a very resilient economy because it's diverse. And when I think of infrastructure, I think that equals jobs. So I hope that we will be able to work through this budget. And I can't help though but think that this pandemic, I think you might all agree with me, is a time for all of us to hit the reset button on everything, on family, on work-life balance, on how we're connected to one another, and how we're being smarter about everything that we do. When this first hit, I thought this was Mother Nature talking to us in a big way. And the legislature and your state government moves very slowly. And this is an opportunity for us to look not only 2 years into the future, but into the mid-future and be more thoughtful about our transportation dollar. The change was happening all around us before the pandemic, and it's still happening. One of my big issues is promoting telecommuting. That particular bill was just a bill to encourage state employees to adopt a plan for telecommuting, and it was vetoed by the governor. We have about 70,000 state employees here in the Austin area, many of whom travel from the outskirts of Austin into the inner core of Austin. And I think this pandemic is going to be an opportunity for us to, if I'm not a believer in going entirely 100% telecommuting, but I think depending on your sector, whether that's engineering sector or arts or education, we're gonna find our groove on what is a good remote work from work policy that will be hopefully good for the environment and good for our movability solutions. So that's one issue. And then another big initiative of mine is safety, public safety, traffic safety in particular. There's probably a few of you here who know that the city of Houston was real big on one of my bills, which was having a uniform prima facie, lowering the prima facie speed limit in neighborhoods. And studies show that when a pedestrian or a cyclist interacts with a car just at 5 miles per hour slower, they have a 50% chance of surviving, increase their chance of surviving. So I feel for all of those families who have lost a loved one in vehicle, pedestrian, bike situations. And it probably one of my toughest moments on the transportation committee was when we had families come and testify about their granddaughter or their father who lost their life because of a texting, distracted driving situation. It took a long time, too long, for Texas to pass a statewide ban on texting while driving. Of course, now you can still be on the phone in Corsicana or in Corpus Christi, and there's no uniform ban on just hands-free hands-free accounting for the fact that we should be just driving hands-free, meaning no distracted driving at all. So that'll be a bill that I'm going to be working on again, is a statewide ban on texting and using the phone. And I'm driven because I heard very powerful testimony from families when we were trying to get the texting ban through. So safe streets legislation is something that I work on. And the gas tax, of course, still is the gas tax. It's been the gas tax since I was at the University of Texas. And we haven't moved forward on that, nor have we done anything like an index to the gas tax. My staff is working on a proposal for us to put forward, because when I talk to people about the gas tax, when gas prices are relatively low, like they are now, people don't mind if a nickel is going into a savings account that is a infrastructure account for transportation. So I'm hoping to put forward a savings plan for us. So it'd be a temporary index or an increase in revenue to our transportation funds. And we've got to be smarter about it because our vehicles are more efficient, or they're running on electricity and they're not paying into the purse. So that's what I'm looking at. And speaking about trends, the trend, of course, in transportation is alternatively fueled vehicles. And one of the bills that I passed in my first legislative session was mandating that the Department of Motor Vehicles would record the number of alternatively fueled vehicles in the state of Texas. When I asked them when I first got elected, well, how many are there? Because they're not paying into the purse. Should they be paying a one-time fee? They couldn't tell me. So now we know how many there are. There's a report that's produced annually, and this could be the driver for more people to either use a transportation network company like an Uber or a Lyft. In Austin, we were buzzing around with scooters, or for people to invest in an alternatively fueled vehicle. And my hope is that TxDOT in the future will be a greater partner with our cities and our counties as they plan transportation projects, especially more than one person in a car. I can't help but be jealous of the fact that in Houston, TxDOT built that 610 elevated going into the Galleria just for buses. It was a rubber tire alternative that seemed to make a lot of sense to me. And it was a really good public-private partnership. You know, the sales tax base, property tax base in the Galleria paying over time for much of that project. So I love those kind of creative solutions. And not to be snarky, but who would have thought that Houston would be much more progressive and creative than Austin, who thinks it's cool, and we're really not that cool. So I think that's kind of me in a nutshell. Of course, I'm wrestling with I-35 here in Austin, which gets all the bad headlines all the time. It's no fun, but things are changing around us, and we need to respond to those changes and be more thoughtful and think about the future. So instead of rambling on, I'll take some questions and see what some of your thoughts are on what I had to say.
Thank you for that. And you definitely hit some of the highlights for us. I know there are still some questions that we've got, and we're kind of move through them and have more of a discussion. But thank you for all of that. I know our chairman, Mustafa Tamiz, really looking at, you are somebody that has just vast knowledge, institutional knowledge about things. And as we look forward, how do we, what does that look like for different members that are coming in? So Mustafa, I'm going to tee it to you to follow up on that thought.
Representative, very good to see you again.
Hola, how are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for being here with us today. We've had 12 new members last cycle in the House, and this cycle is likely to have more and potentially flipping the Texas House. I like the way you started this conversation, which is transportation is not a Democratic or a Republican thing. And then your leadership and your knowledge of engineering and infrastructure is incredibly valuable as the House, from a partisan standpoint, changes House, right? But as a organization that represents not just engineering firms, but a whole gambit of public safety and infrastructure organization. Freddie Warner's there from Methodist on Memorial Herman. I just said Methodist. He probably just like defriended me right now.
He's just removed sponsorship.
Right, just like pull it out, right? But we have a lot of different people that are part of this because we see transportation as really a quality of life issue. Yeah. That if people can get from point A to point B, it's valuable. And you understand, we understand that for every dollar you invest in transportation, you get $3 to $6 in economic activity. For every $1 billion you put in infrastructure, you create 13,000 jobs. as new members come in, what is the best way? Because they're coming from so different backgrounds, right? They're a good reflection of what Texas looks like. And this issue is not a partisan issue. This issue is not just to get more public sector contractor for engineers. This is a quality of life issue. Can you help us on thinking through how do we educate people in a very difficult legislative environment that you're going into, right? There's shortage of money, lots of new members coming in, access to the Capitol is questionable depending on, COVID-19. What's our best way to educate and advocate for public infrastructure projects?
Well, what helps me is the personal touch, and by the personal touch, I mean it doesn't have to be in my face or in my office, but it does mean letting me know where you are in the world. If you're at the corner of X and Y and you're familiar with this intersection or this problem or this situation, it makes it real. In other words, no form letters. The moveon.orgs or the other movement-driven emails, they, first of all, they don't get past the filter many times, and secondly, they don't tell me who you are. What's your name? Where are you from? Why do you care? And it means a lot more when I get an email from a constituent. It can say, Rep, I live in the Wells Branch neighborhood and I'm tired of this situation and I hope you can help me. It resonates 10 times more. So we need to know who our state representatives are. We're going to have a lot of newbies come in because this election there's a wave election that's hitting this country and this state. So we're going to have a lot of new friends that we're all going to have to make. And as one of my professors at UT told me, where there's change, there's opportunity. So with a lot of the new folks that are going to be in the legislature, they need to hear from you so that they are being mindful of your voice, of your business, of your role, of your concerns. And we have a governor and a lieutenant governor now who reacted 2 years ago. Texans voted at near presidential levels, and the legislature put $6 billion in cash into public education. That didn't happen out of the goodness of their hearts. It happened because Texans voted in big, big numbers. So I hope that Texans will vote again this cycle, and it will make a big statement about the need for us to focus on these big rock issues like transportation and infrastructure investments, because these are, I don't need to tell this group this, these are medium-term and long-term investments. You plant these oak trees not because you're going to benefit from their shade. You plant these oak trees because the next generation will. And Texas needs to be fluid, and at some point, I remember arguing with one of my colleagues once about transit and transportation, and he was really being real obstinate about it. And I said, well, because it was mass transit, and unfortunately, sometimes transit becomes a left or right thing. And I said to him, at what point did Texans stop dreaming? When did we stop thinking big? And we can't be doing, the reason I preface my comments with the COVID and the change is because with this body blow that we're all taking, this is an opportunity for us to think differently and be bold and be creative and think about the future. So I'm always glass half full, and I hope that you are glass half full, and that you will make sure that if you're not already connected to your state and local elected officials, that you will use this as an opportunity. We've all learned how to Zoom, and this is going to be our world for a while, and this has got to be okay. But business will go on at the Capitol, and but thank you for your question, Mustafa. This calls for a lot of thought and a lot of engagement.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think it made me think, I don't know if the House and the Senate does this, but it would be nice if there was a buddy system so that somebody new coming in gets matched up with somebody that's been, you know, been part of the process for a longer time, and can kind of guide them a little bit or offer some insight. And it actually made me, I think too, that it would be nice to even, we've done kind of transportation 101 conversations before, but there's a huge learning curve that happens for many issues. And so does it make sense if we line something up where it could be a good transportation 101 from kind of some of the experts that have been doing this policy for a long time.
Yeah.
And, you know, I did post in the chat box an article that Mustafa, well, he dug it up, and I started looking at it, and I thought, oh my gosh, is there something on the ballot? What? And then I realized it was from 2015, but it's a great article because it talks about how transportation can help accelerate the economy. And it's so timely for right now, obviously. So thank you for that. I put that in the chat box. I encourage everybody to take a look at it. It is part of the messaging that we've been using and talking about with everybody that we've spoken to. So thank you for that, Mustafa. I want to go back and talk about safety. We know that you've been a huge champion of safety as it relates to transportation. And I think it was House Bill 1287 that was your bill, and dealing with, we talked about the reduction in the speed limit. And my question is, it sounds as if you would plan to put legislation like that together again. I know that it's not just it's also for urban areas and cities. Our city, our public works department and transportation department here locally has also asked for that. So, and I want to give credit to Jay Crosley with Farm City, who is he's been on all of these calls, and he is championing, I can't talk. He is a champion of safety, and has asked specifically about your bill to everybody that we've spoken to. So, Jay, if you're on, can you say hello?
Yep. Hi, Representative Israel. Thanks so much for being here and all that you do. And yeah, I guess I'm very excited about what you already said. And so, you know, I wonder if you think your colleagues are excited too, and how much can we achieve this year? We've been telling all the legislators, we just sent a mailing to every legislator that there aren't only liberal or conservative or urban or rural solutions, and we actually need a lot of solutions, and we need a lot of bills to deal with the safety issue. So, yeah. So thanks so much.
Yeah, the dynamic every legislative session is a unique baby, and sometimes it's not a very pretty baby. And this time around, we've got redistricting that we will deal with. It's going to be delayed because I still understand that the census results will be delayed coming into us. All signs point to a special session, so don't buy those plane tickets or make those reservations just yet. And it's going to be a difficult budget year. So these are two big issues, but we're going to have a more balanced state government. I do believe that the House is going to go into Democratic control. I think all of the indicators are pointing in that direction, and that for those of us in the business world, that's a good thing. We will be the counterbalance to the Senate that, in my view, has been pushing too far to the right. It's not in the realistic middle of where most Texans are. So we do, in my view, need a counterbalance to the Senate and an awakening for the governor, so that bills like telecommuting that were just pilot bills that were just a good idea, or bills that have a lot of support, like the speed limit bill in the city of Houston, the city of Dallas were big supporters, city of Austin, that those are able to move through the pipeline before things get all gummed up with redistricting and the details of the budget. So I preface all that to say that I'm told, I've not been through a legislative session where redistricting is the topic. I'm told not to expect a lot of productivity, but we've never had a year in which we're in the midst of a pandemic. Our government is reacting to that, and we're going to have a lot of new people, and the census results are being delayed even further into the 140-day session. So, you know, it's going to be weird. And the fact that we meet every other year normally is a good thing, but this time around it hasn't been. We've been legislating by letter to Governor Abbott, you know, just kind of folding it up and sending it in and hope that it connects, because the governor has the emergency powers right now. And there's a lot of things that are that we could be doing that we're not. But Jay, rest assured that I do feel strongly still about safety. And I don't know about y'all, but when it was, you know, in the darkest times of like, you know, May, where we were, you know, locked down, and I would get in the car and drive just to get out of the house. I found people were driving way too fast. People were going nuts, and we were seeing deadly accidents here in the Austin area. I don't know about you in Houston, but there's something about the human nature of being locked up, I think, that unleashed itself on the roads again. So that we, for a while, it was good, and then it wasn't good. So we've got to learn to calm down our speeds and be more creative in our solutions. But I will continue to forge ahead, because there's real Texans and who have lost loved ones that Jay, through his advocacy, has introduced me to, that that I'm not going to forget.
Yes, thank you. And following up with more of the safety conversation, I know Mr. McSood from Dannenbaum had a question about a truck incident. Are you still on?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Representative Israel. I want to share a story with you about one of our employees. He was actually training to be a triathlete. He was actually on a bicycle in Austin, which I thought, you know, of all the cities, Austin supports pedestrians and bicyclists more than any other city that I know in Texas, right? So he's in that lane, in his own lane, bicycle lane, training to be a triathlete. And he unfortunately got struck by a truck that we believe he was texting. He was on the, you know, texting, and then he went ahead and struck him. So what I found incredible is now our employee is practically quadriplegic. Went through 2 years of therapy. He's still working with us, but obviously he can't walk, and so on and so forth. But here's the deal. Out of all this, $100,000 worth of expenses, so on and so forth, I think the driver got away with, I don't know if it was a $50 or a $200 fine, and that's it.
Wow.
So it just tells me, you know, we can speak. It just doesn't look like we have enough deterrent for things to happen like that. So I don't know if we're working on something and we can do something. You know, this is close to our heart. One of our employees happening, and not any employee. You know, somebody who's actually training to be a triathlete.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing your story and your colleague's story. The first thing that comes to mind is, I'm not familiar with the penalties, but I know that in the 80s, when Mothers Against Drunk Driving and others became more, when they became better advocates for the loved ones that they lost, you started to see the laws change and the penalties change. And I'll be happy to look into whether there's any penalty adjustments that have been thought of, and if not, we can certainly take a look at that this session and perhaps bring them in line with another bad driving habit, which is unsafe driving habit, like driving under the influence. So, but thanks for bringing that to our attention. My legislative director is on the line. I'm sure she's taking good notes for me right now.
Thank you. And any help you need or any additional details, I'm sure he would be happy to share more with you. But I just was struck at the if he was a drunk driver, he would have been handled differently. But because he was distracted,
Yeah.
it was just like a little fine, and then we're done, and then destroy completely somebody's life.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Again, the being us as legislators being connected to the tragedy somehow, some way, if not through our own personal lives, it's through a personal interaction, is very, very helpful. It's sad to say, but the texting, the bill on banning texting while driving would have suffered another death were it not for 4 years ago when the bill passed. The only reason it passed, it was stuck in the Senate again. The only reason it passed was because you guys may recall a horrific tragedy in Bandera, where I think there was 11 or 12 senior citizens on a institutional, minibus, and a dually heavy pickup crossed the line. He was distracted driving, texting while driving, killed every senior on that bus. It happened in the district of a senator in the Hill Country who suddenly changed her mind. And that's why the bill passed. So it's sad to say, but the human tragedies should mean something. So thank you again for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I know that you, Mikhail, I think you and Jay should obviously talk too. And Jay, did you have, I know you wanted to make one more quick point on this topic, and then we're going to go to funding.
Yeah, just to quickly add to what Mikhail and Rep. Israel said is currently, if you hurt someone and you're convicted of drunk driving or of leaving the scene, there's elevated penalties if someone was hurt or killed. But that if you're texting and you hurt someone or any other kind of violation and somebody dies, there's the penalty is still $50. And so there has been discussion of specifically distracted driving and speeding, that there could be elevated penalties if you actually hurt someone. And I think that's an interesting concept that you should be responsible if you actually hurt somebody.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And, definitely probably more than ever, safety has just been, it's been churning and churning and churning. And it's now thankfully elevated to a point where I think it's consuming more of the conversation around policy. So really appreciate your leadership on that. I do want to go back and talk a little bit about some of the funding and other policy considerations. I know that Tom Munson with Trans Systems had to jump off, but he did have a question about, you mentioned the temporary gas tax funding, and he was curious if you could talk a little bit more about that, and if it would work like a savings account, would be used in kind of the traditional way for expanding highways or for other modes like mass transit.
Well, Andrew, you know me, I'm not going to do anything that's dedicated just to highways.
Correct.
If I manage to have some magic fairy dust and it results in an improvement to transportation, it damn well better help all kinds of transportation. We can't keep doing things the way we've been doing them in transportation, and and the intersection of technology and transportation we're in the midst of it now. So the legislation is in progress. My team is working on it and researching best practices in other states. But I feel as though if you don't ask, you don't get. And we should put a proposal on the table that talks about long-term savings for big projects. Part of my inspiration was the project at 610 that drops into the Galleria. That was a property tax savings account over the course of many years that then paid for this project to happen. So I think, again, taxpayers want us to be smart with our tax dollars. So the fine points haven't been put on it, but I see it going to like the mobility fund where it could be used on different things. We just had the expansion. For those of you who are familiar with Austin, we have one 32-mile rail line that goes from Leander to Austin, and because of a $50 million grant from TxDOT several years ago, Cap Metro was able to bank that money and pull down more federal money for the expansion of a very popular line. It gets to the convention center in Austin, it's full. And that's just the beginning. Austin is, way behind on all that stuff. But I mentioned that there was a little bit of TxDOT money in there to help the locals do something creative and different. And I hope that we can do that more often in the future. But that means new revenue, and that means working across party lines to encourage my Republican friends to see this as a smart use of revenue. And I think it is. But we'll get back to you, Andrea, as that's coming together on the details of it.
Okay, I know Mustafa had a point to that. You wanted to add?
One of the things first, Carol Lewis is out as our former board chair, and Carol's always made it a point where TAG has been about multimodal. So when we push for revenue, it's never for one particular project. It's about revenue for transportation in general. And we started a state of mobility under Mayor Turner after he testified in front of TxDOT, asking that funds be released for Metro in Houston, as well as the highway funding that's there. So I think we're on board with you and what you're talking about, and most of our members see it that way. I was going to suggest something to you, and the reason why I posted that article years ago was to talk about the indexing of the gas tax as a kind of like a full employment act in Texas. When oil prices are high, our oil industry employs a lot of people, a lot of engineers, a lot of infrastructure type folks, and gas tax should be low, right? Because in essence, that we're paying a lot at the pump, so therefore we should pay lower gas tax. But if oil industry is not doing well, then we need funds to build infrastructure to employ people that are losing jobs in the oil and gas industry. So tying it in a way to the industry, right, as a way of saying, look, we want to make sure that Texans are employed and our economy is diversified over the years. But one challenge we have, and sometimes it's an opportunity, which is when oil prices are high, we do really well in Texas. So while the rest of the nation in prior recessions was losing jobs, Houston and Texas as a whole, our unemployment numbers were lower because oil and gas industry was doing well. Now, as we look to the future, our unemployment numbers are lower than what the national numbers are. And part of that is that we've had a double hit. We've had COVID, but we've also had a decline in the oil and gas prices. Mm-hmm. So I think tying it together, like an indexing a fund, but indexing it in the context of the oil industry is helpful because people understand there's such fragility around the oil and gas industry, people losing their jobs, and they've gone up and down many, many times before.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. You're the master of branding. So I take your free advice and know that others pay dearly for it. So thank you very much, Mustafa. I appreciate that. But yeah, this is about a 21st century economy that is diverse, that has demonstrated resilience, and but that needs to change. So make no doubt about it. Creating this kind of an index would be a big deal. But I think it's smart for us to adjust for the highs and the lows. I'm a realtor, so I know you've got to plan for the highs and the lows because they're going to come.
Yeah. Thank you, Mustafa and Representative. I also want to kind of talking about Dr. Lewis. She had a question about technology. And Dr. Lewis, if you're available, if you would like to ask your question.
Hello, Representative Israel. Thank you for being with us today. I'm kind of wanting to, I love everything we've talked about in terms of the funding and obviously the safety, hugely important for us. I kind of wanted to ask a question though that may take us in a different direction. And it's about sort of technology and advancement. So you actually got me thinking about this when you talked about Texas thinking big, right? Mm-hmm. And you know, when you said, when did we stop thinking that way? So it made me wonder, what do you think about automation, legislation related to facilitating new technologies? You know, our state has kind of taken a laissez-faire approach, kind of open door to the new technologies coming in. So I just wanted to ask if you're thinking, is it appropriate that way, or should we be thinking more in terms of opening that door? And I'll just give you one example. One of the things that the cities have talked about is that the new technologies, in order to really work, they need the infrastructure to talk to them. So in other words, the signals and the infrastructure needs to talk to the vehicles. But every sort of manufacturer has a different metric. And so should we in Texas do something to help our cities have the same metric? So when one of these technologies comes in, it's easy for them to talk to our infrastructure. So just kind of what do you think about that?
No, it's you're reminding me, Dr. Lewis, that we have a really cool committee at TxDOT that, in my view, doesn't get enough attention and doesn't always have regular attendance from cities and industry leaders. But TxDOT has a transportation technology working group, and I believe they meet quarterly. I've been to a few of them. I haven't been lately. But when you go to these meetings, it's in the big TxDOT boardroom, and you're hearing from local leaders and technology leaders, and they talk about cutting edge things that are happening, what the examples of you know, the infrared technology that is critical to automation, and how transportation engineers need to factor design into infrared technology. Now, I know as a realtor, I'm fumbling this ball horribly, but you're reminding me that there is a quarterly working group at TxDOT, and you know, I'll ask my staff to see if there's a way for us to put more structure to that working group that could be a bridge to the cities. We need more communication, in my view, on these kinds of things between the state and the locals, and including our private sector smarty pants people, so that we are being cutting edge, and we are thinking about best practices. And it's okay if one of those best practices came from a West Coast state. It's okay. Let's grab it. Let's use it. So, but thank you for mentioning it, and I will just give a shout out to TxDOT for their transportation technology working group. And Andrea, I don't know if you're familiar with it, or if you want to, Taryn on my staff can send us a link to how to be engaged with that working group, and maybe there's a way for us to formalize it and help it be a better conduit. Thank you, Louis.
Thank you very much. I think that sounds great.
Yeah, I will follow up with Taryn.
All right.
So we're probably going to go back to funding, obviously, because that's a broad issue and it covers a lot of things. I know Harrison Humphreys with Air Alliance wanted to ask a question on that topic. So Harrison, if you're available.
Sure, and thank you, Representative Israel, for joining us today. I really appreciate all your insights. Like Andrea said, going back to the funding questions, I did want to ask a bit of a more of a pointed question about the very specific restrictions placed on State Highway Fund and its uses. You know, as I'm sure you know, the Prop 1, Prop 7 funds, State Highway funds are very pointed towards being used on highway projects. And a lot of people feel that these restrictions lead TxDOT to design sort of one-dimensional projects like the ongoing 45 expansion here in Houston, and I'm sure many feel similarly about Austin's 35 project. Do you think the legislature would be supportive of removing those restrictions, both to free up funds for multimodal projects, but also maybe give TxDOT greater flexibility during potential upcoming cash shortfalls?
Um, of course, I would support it, and I'll give you a pragmatic political response in that the governor appoints the commissioners at TxDOT, and the governor then looks over their shoulder and says, "Are you doing what I want you to do?" And it didn't used to be that way. I'm an Ann Richards Democrat, and I work in the appointments division, and we put good women and men on these boards and commissions, and for the most part, we let them do their job. And I am afraid that the commissioners at TxDOT are beholden to the governor. They should be grateful to the governor to be given this opportunity to serve in this way. But I am concerned that things get politicized that shouldn't be politicized. And the politics of tolls are still weird. But again, with more balance, with more people voting, you will find people who are suddenly open to your ideas, and redistricting is going to happen. So to put this back in an electoral concept, some of my colleagues and I are in districts that are either strongly Republican or strongly Democrat. And one of the things I really like about this election cycle is that there are women and men who are voting, and they are and the candidates are having to pay attention to that November voter, not just the March voter. That's a good thing for Texas. That's a good thing for our policies. So, but the specific point that you're bringing up is it's still going to be a political wall to get through, and I'm afraid I'm just one girl who doesn't have the superpowers to knock that wall down. I always try, but I'm going to need some more friends, and I'm going to need some push to make that happen. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that we should be looking at creative solutions, which is why I'm bringing up the indexing concept, because that's one way to take a new purse and do some creative things with it.
Thank you, Harrison. I know that's been something that's circulated quite a bit. Obviously, the redesign and reconstruction of I-45 also brought a lot of focus and spotlight on the formula and TxDOT being able to use funds for different things. Another way to look at it, and kind of another lens, is that while certainly we should always look at how we're spending money and formulas, we know that there's still not even enough to go around for our highways, roads, and bridges. And there still is a gap, right? We had the 2030 commission where we know that there was a $5 billion per year gap. I don't think we never quite reached that 5. We got pretty close, but we didn't reach it. But we also, on the other hand, cannot ignore the fact that we need to find funding for alternative modes, whether it would come from that fund or it would be created in another way. And so I think understanding the political viability of what you're saying, where the formula probably won't be touched for a while. One of the things that TAG is looking at on our agenda is what we call it relaxing the cap, right? So we're capped on the sales tax. It starts to get into that local control conversation. We believe strongly that if the state can't find a way to pay for something, we should have the ability to vote it in ourselves, choose ourselves to fund something. And one thing that came up during our conversation with Mondo Martinez was, while we are talking about a very broad relaxing of the cap for sales tax, there's also been a push, and there will be a push moving forward for specifically exempting transit entities to be able to, so they call it bust the cap. And so then we're not just painting with a broad brush, but we're really focusing and targeting on an issue that's needed. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I know TAG will continue to explore that as we get closer to session.
To make sure I'm understanding you correctly, Andrea, you're talking about local control specifically for transit projects?
for transit agencies that are, their service area is limited because the surrounding municipalities can't, they're capped out for their ability to raise, you know, if they wanted to raise it a 1% to be able to now have transit service, they cannot.
We should look at all of those solutions. I worry about the burden to consumers on that a little bit, and the burden. I mean, property taxes are at a pain point for a lot of Texans as well. My focus on the gas taxes is that when the markets are low, that becomes a more acceptable part of the family budget, which is why it's something that I see as an option. But I mean, you're reminding me of the other painful chapter in the history of Texas transportation is that we were unable to pass the local control bills in the early 2000s that had a lot of support from the cities in Texas, and we're saying, give us the authority to raise money ourselves. And perhaps this is the year where we can actually get that through the House and put pressure on the Senate to say, if you don't want to do it, let us do it. So, you know, maybe that's the possum that's going to wake up again.
Well, and it does tap into other conversations. I know vehicle registration, the ability to, you know, again, not a mandate from the state, but just saying if you wanted to, as a county, you could opt in for $10 on vehicle registration, and what that would generate. And for some counties, it's tremendous. And so we're looking at all of that. And the other thing that you talked about earlier was alternatively fueled vehicles, which I think, you know, we sat with you last session and worked on just talking about that legislation. There's another study that you that passed, that your legislation passed, commissioned, that I think comes out in December. It's a more of a deeper dive, which you were talking about the percentage of people using electric vehicles. Mm-hmm. So can you talk about from your vantage point, the devil's in the details for this bill? And so how do you see that? Where does that money go? How is it administered? You know, is it tacked on annually to your vehicle registration? What is from your vantage point? What does that look like?
Well, it's if we're going to tax people who are concerned enough about the environment, that's an indicator that there's some popularity to then put that into an environmentally friendly transportation solution. So, but the report that you're talking about comes out in November from DMV, and it's a good indicator to us of what are the trends that are happening just in Texas. Because when we look at national engineering trade journals and stuff like that, you don't always get the state picture. So we will have a report in November that tell us exactly how many alternatively fueled vehicles there are in Texas, and so that you can establish a trend. And again, to go back to the pandemic, I think a lot of people are more connected to environmental. What can I do, you know, as one consumer about to be smarter about the planet Earth, and so there are people who have the ability to make that kind of purchase, and the market has now caught up to the fact that these vehicles are more in parity with a combustible engine. So all of these details need to be worked out, but I remembering from last session, there was a lot of consensus, because we hadn't done anything like this before. There was a lot of consensus from a variety of interest groups to try something, and that includes the manufacturers of these vehicles as well. We might disagree on the size of the fee, right. You know, $100 fee versus a $500 fee.
Right.
But there was a lot of interest in moving forward, and we'll be working on that again.
And we thought it was pretty palatable, you know, during the transportation forum in San Antonio this year, Chairman Nichols was really it was part of his platform that he was talking about. And then in more recent conversations, I don't know if it's as much on the table. Certainly on the Senate side, it seems as if there might be a view to go back and re-examine. They weren't titling it this, but it's certainly what it is vehicle miles traveled. And saying, before we touch alternative fuel vehicles and try to tweak that, do we have to go back and look at it all from a big vantage point, say, do we have to move to a different funding model in general? So, but who knows how long that takes. And in the meantime, we're not collecting the potential revenue.
Well, Andrea, by the virtue of the D after my name, I'm already being called a socialist. So don't put me in the corner of wanting to know how many miles you traveled.
Well, and it was interesting because I know that's been part of the objection to VMTs.
Big brother.
But it seemed as if there was some, interest. Vice Chairman Kelly Hancock on the Senate side was the one that was really talking about re-examining, the gas tax and just is it going to be a model that suits us moving forward in general? Because look at what technology is already changing for us, and so how do we look at that? So I am mindful of time. I could sit and talk about this for much longer. I'm not sure everybody else feels that way, but we certainly want to thank you for all of your knowledge and time today. And we will absolutely be following up with you and your staff. Taryn's been great working with us. And so we want to stay close to these conversations with you and figure out how we can support you. And what we've enjoyed about these conversations is that we have the ability to have them pretty close to one another. We're doing about a couple of these a week so that we can really saturate ourselves with everything that's going on and talk about issues in one session that can overlap in another. And so one thing that's been really strong is safety, and then a willingness to look at some different funding options. That seems to be two really common themes. And so thank you for all of your leadership, and we look forward to staying in touch.
Well, it'd be remiss if I didn't remind everybody you can vote early until October the 30th.
Yes.
So please take advantage of it. And kudos to all of our Harris County elected officials who the county officials seem to be doing a great job with making voting as big as possible so that people can say yes to voting. So thank you all for engaging with me and letting me talk about my favorite topic on the planet.
Thank you, Representative.
All right. Bye.
Stay safe and healthy.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody.